Alright guys, welcome back to Strong Successful Male. So for today, I'm going to be going over an article here that talks about how this is a year old, but it's definitely relevant for today. And the article title is, Federal Judge Rules Male-Only Draft is Unconstitutional. Now again, this happened a year ago, but I think it's definitely important to talk about. And given the fact that they're saying the judge ruled that just the male-only draft is unconstitutional, is a classic example of, in terms of the feminist movement, be careful what you wish for. Because now, in his opinion, women should be drafted just as much as men. Because, hey, if they're supposed to be equal, hey, that should be equal too. So I'm going to go through this article here and share my thoughts. So it says here, this is from CNN, says a federal judge ruled the Selective Services System's men-only registration unconstitutional late Friday, rejected the reasoning of a 1981 Supreme Court decision, opting for the recent women's rights rationale of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the contemporary court. U.S. District Court Judge Gray Miller, based in Houston, spurned the government's argument about excluding women, based partly on the interest and readiness for combat, by declaring this argument smacks of archaic and overbroad generalizations about women's preferences. Miller said that while historical restrictions on women in the military may have justified past discrimination, men and women now have many similar roles. Again, thank you, feminist movement, for that. If you wanted equality and be 100% equal to us, then if there is a war, major war in a draft, it's only fair that both parties are subject to the draft. Again, the old be careful what you wish for. Goes on, if there was ever a time to discuss the place of women in the armed services, that time has passed, he wrote. Miller and the Selective Service have not shown that the male-only registration requirement was substantially related to Congress's objective of raising and supporting armies. Congress eliminated the draft in the early 1970s, but all men ages 18 to 25 are required by law to provide basic personal information to the Selective Service system. The judge's decision, favoring a group known as National Coalition for Men and two men of registration age, would have no immediate effect. It did not block the government's current policy. Any appeal by the agency would go to the New Orleans-based Fifth Circuit of Appeals before it would reach the Supreme Court. It goes on to say, it is uncertain whether it would reach that level. The Selective Service System has urged Miller to reject the case, largely because the National Commission on Military, National, and Public Service, appointed by Congress, is now studying the male-only registration policy. Irrespective of the fate of the case of appeal, National Coalition for Men versus Selective Service System recalls practice and precedent of another era. The government agency relied heavily on the 1981 Supreme Court decision, Rosker versus Goldberg, that said women could be excluded from the draft because they were not similarly situated for men for draft purposes. That decision highlighted the fact that women could not serve in combat. Well, I've been training in martial arts for 6 years, Krav Maga, and that comes from the Israeli military, and it's pretty much street fighting and taking a lot of fighting skills from different fighting systems and putting them into a very practical, brutal training system. And I've trained with a lot of women, and let me tell you, these women can be trained and they can be vicious animals and they can whip some ass. So I can tell you right now, I don't want to hear from these different groups whining and complaining that women shouldn't be part of the draft, but even though they want equality, they can't do it, because guess what? I've seen some women whip some ass. And also, anybody can pull the trigger. However, when you're mixing men and women together in an infantry unit, that could cause some issues. But in terms of capability, it can be done. So I don't want to hear that we want the special treatment, but we want equality, but we want the special treatment that we can't have the draft. You can't have it both ways. Again, as I said about 3 times already, be careful what you wish for, ladies, in terms of equality and doing whatever a man can do. It says here, goes on to say, In the nearly 4 decades since Rosker, however, women's opportunities in the military have expanded dramatically. Miller observed, in 2013, the Department of Defense officially lifted the ban on women in combat. He cited Ginsburg's majority opinions in equal rights cases since then for greater scrutiny on the military policy. In 1996, U.S. versus Virginia, and 2017, Sessions versus Morales-Santana. Typically, the defender of legislation that differentiates on the basis of gender must show at least that the challenge classification serves important governmental objectives and that discriminatory means employed are substantially related to the achievement of those objectives. That's all in quotations. He acknowledged the government objective of raising and supporting armies, but did not accept arguments that requiring women to register might affect female enlistment. By increasing the perception that women will be forced to serve in combat roles. At its core, the selective service system argument rests on the assumption that women are significantly more combat adverse than men. Miller wrote, adding that no evidence was offered to support that claim, which he deemed an ancient canard about women. Further, under Rosker, hang on a second, guys. Further, under Rosker, the disputive issue is whether men and women are similarly situated in regard to the draft. Thus, the relevant question is not what proportion of women are physically eligible for combat. It may well be that only a small percentage of women meets the physical standards for combat positions. But Miller added, a similarly small percentage of men may also be eligible for combat, which would offer no reason to discriminate against women. So, that was from a year ago. I'm going to have to follow up to see how things are going with that. But the bottom line is, like I said earlier, this never would have happened before. But again, thanks to the feminist movement and that trying to make women like men and men like women and have equality, things like this are going to happen and it's going to backfire. So there was a major war and all of a sudden there was a draft and they started drafting women. You can imagine how up in arms they would be. But again, you wanted to have equality. You can do things just as good as a man. Okay. Then if we got to be drafted, then so can women. So, all right, guys, that's it for today. Be sure to share your opinions down below. Love to hear from them. And also be sure to like the video, share with your friends, and subscribe. And I will talk to you next time.